Hey, welcome everyone. It is September 3rd, 2025, launch of season 6, episode 1 of Direct Line Live. Welcome everyone. Our guest today is candidate for Maryland's 6th Congressional District, Chris Burnett, and our hosts tonight are Don Irvine and David Shepard. Take it away, guys.
All right. Thanks, Dwight. Welcome, Chris. Good to see you.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. I almost missed this once before. I wasn't going to miss it again.
Oh, that's great. So we'll start off by letting you give a little bit of an intro into who you are and what your background is, and then we'll start having a little bit of a discussion about your campaign.
Great. So my background, I've just retired from the Marine Corps after 22 years on active duty. I was commissioned in 2001 in July. That was during my first and second year of law school. So then when I went back for my second year of law school, that was September 11th. And that has defined my entire adult life. My decision to join the Marine Corps and to be a lawyer was changed dramatically by September 11th. And then over the course of those 22 years, I've had an opportunity to lead Marines or advise at every echelon of command. I've had 5 deployments, 4 of them on the ground in Iraq, 1 as a part of a Marine Expeditionary Unit. And I actually landed in Maryland coming off of my 5th deployment. So over the course of those 22 years, I got married, had 4 kids. And then when we arrived here, my wife had said, no more deployments, no more Marine Corps. So think about what you want to do next. So after the Pentagon, I had a chance to go to MAR4 Cyber, retired out of MAR4 Cyber in February. And as I was looking at what I wanted to do next, I realized that the politics in Maryland, and particularly in northern Montgomery County, that I would not be able to live with myself if I didn't attempt to try to effectuate some level of change. I always looked at my service in the Marine Corps as driven by accountability, transparency, and integrity, which is a must if you're an officer and you're going to lead Marines. And I think those are the things that are lacking in Congress right now. So as I was transitioning out, it took a little bit of work with my wife, but we decided that this was the time to try to influence what's happening here in Western Maryland and to try to make a difference by continuing to serve in a different capacity.
Well, that's great. I mean, I actually scroll through some of your information, and you've got a beautiful family. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's lovely. And I see that you've been very, very active on the campaign trail there, doing parades and getting out and speaking out and about. I guess really trying to get yourself out there and get known. I guess one of the things that you have talked about too is April Delaney and her self-funding.
Yes.
That gives her a tremendous advantage. I happened to stumble across, I guess I was looking at Ballotpedia, and they were showing the campaign finance. And, given that we're not even at the primary stage yet, and it's really early, but she has got a kitty, that's overwhelming right now for, either you or your opponent at this point in time. This is, how much is this going to play in? I mean, what is your prediction for, say, like, should you win the primary? I mean, what are we talking about in money here? How are we going to how are you compete against, someone like April Delaney, who seems to have unlimited funds?
Well, I think, unfortunately, money drives a lot of politics right now. But I think what she can never have is authenticity and a connection to CD6. She doesn't live here. She's worth over $100 million, and she self-funds her campaign. In my opinion, that should arguably disqualify her. But since it does not, she does not have a message that will resonate across CD6. So my hope is not to focus on the amount of money we raise. It's how well we spend the money that we are entrusted with. So whether we raise $100,000 or $2 million, that's not the concern of mine. My concern is connecting with CD6 and spending every dollar as efficiently and as appropriately as possible to extend the message that CD6 deserves a voice that aligns with their lived experience, not a CD8 resident who really has only managed to do one thing well in Congress, and that's insider trading.
Yeah, I'm not, of course I'm biased, but I'm not all that impressed with her. But, in terms of just money, remember Kamala Harris spent over $1 billion and still lost. And Yeah, the striking thing there is Trump in both races was outspent in 16 and maybe even in 20 and 24. But you're in a very competitive seat, so in that case, money can be a bigger issue. But then you also have more potential to raise money as well,
It's true.
because I've been to parts of your district, the western part, which I think is beautiful, which I think is great. I think so much of that is excellent. But
Mhm.
what type of percentage of your district is Montgomery County? Uh, is it a? I imagine it's not a majority.
It's a significant part. So northern Montgomery County is an essential part of the race. Quite frankly, when you break it all down, you have to do well in Montgomery. And what I mean by well is probably about 65-35. That would be doing well in northern Montgomery County. And then the race essentially goes through Frederick. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. So when I go to Garrett, Allegheny, and Washington, that's like going home.
Yeah.
It's Steelers fans, rolling
Yeah.
hills, rural environment is very, very familiar to me. So
Yeah.
I know that I need to gain the trust and earn the support of Western Maryland. But there's no denying the fact that the unaffiliated voters in Frederick and the unaffiliated voters in Northern Montgomery are ultimately going to decide this election. And you're absolutely right. Money will go a long way to reach out to that disenfranchised segment and to convince them of, okay, I am the better candidate for this district. And that's where I think I have an advantage. You can't fake 22 years on active duty and 5 deployments. That level of leadership and problem solving is what I bring to this. And then my ability to connect as a family struggling like everyone else in CD6 right now with too high taxes, over regulation, and a lack of opportunity. That message is going to connect because it's a message that we all care about and are all very concerned about. So of course I'm going to do everything I can to try to build a campaign that focuses first on message, but then looks at fundraising so that we're not at the end of this saying, oh, if we only had enough money, we could have gotten our message out further. But most importantly, we have a message that's going to connect, and we have a pathway to victory, regardless of how much she raises or how much she chooses to self-fund.
Yeah, and I think this is my opinion, but I think it's really a competitive seat. So I think it's one that even people outside of your district, the six, really need to be concerned with and try to help out because this could be key to control of
Yes.
the House. So it could come down to I said that a few years ago about the same district with, I guess it was Neil Parrott. I said it's still a seat we need to win. So
I
I think
couldn't
that's
agree
still
more.
the
And that's
case.
when I talk to folks across Maryland and nationally for that matter,
Yeah,
this is a national race. We
yeah,
need to flip a handful of seats to ensure that we hold on to our majority in the House. And
yeah.
CD6 is extremely competitive. And I
Mhm.
think the approach that I bring makes it very competitive and that I can see us very, very easily pulling ahead once we get a chance to get out, meet with folks, and then start having a chance to compete directly with Delaney. I look forward to the opportunity to debate her. I look
Yeah.
forward to analyzing her record and then looking at what CD6 could have if they had had a voice during her tenure. And then we can start looking forward as to how we're going to leverage CD6 interest against the second half of a Trump presidency.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I look back, at the last few cycles in this district, and it's gotten closer. The races have the margin of victory in terms of votes seems to have been narrowing along the way. I think that's where, I didn't go and do any deep dive of the data, but as you're talking about kind of the independents, unaffiliated, whatnot, uh, that has become a bigger part of the electorate in this area.
Yes.
I think my question really has been, and I saw this when I ran for state senate in Maryland in 2010, that that was starting then. We were starting to see more of these people not register for Republican or Democrat, but they were now moving, just like they didn't want to be affiliated with any party, but that didn't mean they weren't going to vote. The thing is that how do you what were they before, if they were anything, and how do you motivate them to go to the polls, because they will be the key. But in the past, that group as a whole in general has not been a huge block of voting, though it has huge potential influence. What's the plan here?
Well, clearly you have to have a message that's going to resonate. And I think where people have become disenfranchised with politics is that we've lost any sense of an authentic voice. Everything seems to be curated and polished in such a way that people are satisfied with nothing. That they hear what they need to hear, and there's not any tangible, substantive solutions being presented. My approach is going to be how I've approached everything in my adult life. And that is with accountability, transparency, and integrity. I think you have to speak directly to these voters about the problems that they're confronting, and you have to provide them with a solution. And I don't think that's too much to ask. But somewhere in over the last decade or two, we've lost sight of the fact that government exists to solve problems and to set the conditions for their residents to succeed. Somehow politics became a game where constituents were pawns in this game. Look at what's happening with gerrymandering right now. We're not even discussing about how voices are being overlooked, how people have become disenfranchised by this debate we're having over gerrymandering. The fact that we're even discussing it tells me that we have lost sight of the fact that we have to give people a voice. And we have to accept that with that voice, neither party might be happy with the outcome, but what we'll have is the consent of the people. And then as their representative at any echelon of government, your sole obligation is to represent their interests. And somewhere we lost that. My message to the unaffiliated will be, I'm going to fight for them like no one has before. And that's because my family has the same exact interests and concerns that they have. We're concerned about the cost of living. We're concerned about our energy bills. We're concerned about the lack of opportunity that exists along the 270 corridor because Maryland can't seem to get out of its own way. So my ability to communicate that, which is spending time with people, working at the grassroots level, knocking on doors, talking to people at events, I'm going to carry that message to them and then take their feedback to Congress with me.
What you kind of touched on them briefly, but what do you think are some of the weaknesses really of your opponent that maybe people in the district don't realize, or what are some of the reasons that they should fire her?
Well, I'll restate what I started with earlier. One, she doesn't live in the district. She lives in CD8. She's a North Potomac resident. That is absolutely allowed. You only just have to be a resident of the state where you run. So I think that should be disqualifying. But if it's not disqualifying, then it should be something that voters know about. She does not have the lived experience that they have. Then you look at the second part of that. Why does she live in North Potomac? It's because she lives in a $4 million mansion and she has a net worth of over $100 million. Where again, her interpretation of cost of living impacts is going to be very different from somebody who's living paycheck to paycheck in Northern Montgomery, Frederick, or certainly out into Western Maryland. And then you also look at what has she done. And in my opinion, there's two things that any congressman or congresswoman can do. And that is they can be engaged in constituent services. And that is they are visible across the district. They are in Frederick, they're in Hagerstown, they're in Cumberland. They're spending time as often as possible with their constituents. She's been absent. Her constituent services, by all accounts, has been deplorable. She has done nothing for the people of CD6. She has not spent the time in the district that she should. And if you start to think about it, CD6 is a commuter district to DC. So it's not like she would have to fly home to spend time with her constituents. She could drive from her $4 million mansion into the district and spend time with the constituents and get direct feedback on a daily basis. And then when you start to look at, okay, if you're not going to be a constituent services representative, then maybe you're going to be a policy wonk or you're going to have a legislative agenda. She's done none of that. She's absolutely taken zero stands on behalf of CD6. She's done absolutely nothing that's going to benefit CD6 other than vote automatic no on anything that was Republican initiated. And then more importantly, there were things that would have absolutely helped the residents of CD6 that she voted no on because that was where the Democrat Party was voting. So the fact that she has not done constituent service, the fact that she doesn't have strong policy positions, and her voting record is simply no to everything that would otherwise benefit CD6, to me, she's been absent. And I gave her the moniker of do nothing Delaney. And I think she's earned it and lived up to it and continues to embrace that term.
Yeah, David wrote a book called Elections Have Consequences. And I think when we talk about redistricting and things like this is all part of that process, is that the elections do have consequences. The party in power gets to choose these things. And these are statewide type of choices. And I know that you have you mentioned redistricting. I think you had been on someone else's show talking about the potential for redistricting in Maryland, and particularly what they could do to CD6. I mean, the Democrats in Maryland, they control all but one seat, right? In the congressional delegation. 6 has been competitive, but they've been winning it, and but they could. I think you think that they could possibly squeeze that some more and make that totally unwinnable for the Republicans. But what are the consequences of that? I mean, we're now getting a tit for tat kind of a thing going on here. But the Democrats I don't think they realize that the bigger picture here is that they're losing nationwide the registration rate. The Democrats, the Republicans are now outnumbering Democrats. They're gaining ground, and this is going to have the bigger impact because as those shifts continue, and population continues to shift, these blue states will lose, members of Congress. They'll lose a seat here, a seat there, and invariably it'll go to a red state, and then they're going to their backs up against the wall. But the ridiculousness of what's happening in California, Maryland and California, they can be somewhat kind of a mirror image of each other. It's almost like when to me, Martin O'Malley always looked to California to say, oh, what are they doing? We want to implement that here. I think Wes Moore is doing some of the similar things. Is that, oh, they're going to do it there? We ought to try it out here because we're liberal. We love California. We think their policies are good. Policies are horrible for Maryland. And as you said, do nothing Delaney. Yeah, she just rests on her laurels and just all the money, but just automatic, vote, with the Democrats. That is not on either side of the aisle. That does not serve your constituents if you're just an automatic vote on a party line all the time. If you don't actually look at the issue.
I couldn't agree more. I think you go to Congress to work for your constituents, and that is it. You work tirelessly for their interest, and that's it. This idea that career politicians can manage to kick the can down the road at the expense of their constituents has to end. This idea that folks go to Washington to get rich and they don't see this as a sense of selfless service is just wrong. So again, I approach this from, I'm going to carry the lessons I learned in the Marine Corps to Congress. I'm going there to serve selflessly. I'm not going there to trade stocks. I'm not going there to set up my next job. I see it as my civic duty, my civic responsibility to go there, try to change the narrative across Maryland, influence federal policy and law to the benefit of CD6. And that, to me, if you're not doing that, you don't belong there.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because now there is talk of stopping the trading, or a member of Congress can start trading stock stuff. Yeah. I always thought that was as crooked as can be. I mean, there are books about it. I mean, we had a congressman in Northern Virginia. I guess I shouldn't mention his name, but he was very blatant about that. He was, it was revealed in a book, I think Peter Schweitzer, that he met with Ben Bernanke. He and some other congressmen, they discovered, and shortly after that meeting, they were like selling stocks and buying different stocks. And also, it's as crooked as can be. So I think you should mention that big time on the campaign in terms of getting rid of things like that. I mean, I don't begrudge them having, equities and retirement account and broad-based equities, but I think for a member of Congress shouldn't be trading stocks.
Absolutely not.
I can't believe that was been allowed as long as that. And Nancy Pelosi, look how much money she made just by being in Congress, and it was always so too clever in a sense that she could say, "Oh, I'm not trading the stocks. My husband's trading the stocks." So it's it's as crooked as can be. So
it really is. To your earlier point about how they could affect CD6, I think you saw the latest map that has been proposed. I think it moves me to CD8. If that were adopted, they would take Raskin's district and they run it up along 270. They push CD6 out to essentially Poolesville, and then they hug the border with West Virginia. And if they decide to do that, not only will it impact CD1 and try to challenge our one Republican seat, it would absolutely split CD6 and make it, I think, unwinnable. So it would be interesting to see that if I find myself, criticizing Delaney for not living in the district she's running in, that if I get shifted out of CD6 because of the redistricting that has been proposed.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think we've all lived. If you've been around long enough, you wind up in an area because of this redistricting. There are no real set rules,
Yep.
in terms of how a map has to be drawn. It's really up to the legislatures to draw these maps, and for the governor to go and sign off on these things. Is that you know I've lived in this particular home in Gaithersburg for the last 21 years, and I've been in two, maybe three districts. I don't, because I know I've been in six, and I'm now in eight.
Hmm.
I may have even been in four at one point in time.
Yeah.
I kind of gave up in terms of like, I just have to go and show up at, and look at my ballot and say, what district am I in? Check with the Republicans Party and say, who's running in my district? Where do I live now? Because it's just kind of a crazy quilt. And I remember, when Roscoe Bartlett,
Hmm.
got redistricted, you know, what a mess that was. I felt terrible for Roscoe. He'd been serving the people in his district for a long time, and then the new maps came out, and then he now had to take care of part of Montgomery County. He had no connection to Montgomery County. His area was all
Yep.
up, in Frederick and all these other areas, and now he had to do this. So I think that year he he actually came down and marched in the Gaithersburg Labor Day parade to try to build some connection. He lost his race, and he's now living somewhere off the grid, and kind of an interesting thing that goes on
Yes.
there. But you never know. I mean, CD8, I have no voice. I mean, Jamie Raskin's seat, it's like this is crazy to me that I can just sit in the same house for 21 years and just get bounced around like a ping pong ball, and be subject to the whim of the Democrat legislature to say, well, we need to shore up this, or we need to do this. Yeah, if they try to make this unwinnable, it's just like, what would be wrong? I mean, or is there anything wrong with trying to come up with something and let the chips fall where they may? Is using something that is maybe AI generated, with some checks and balances of some sort, and just kind of let it take the population and the number of congressional seats that you are awarded, and just try to keep the districts as compact and as contiguous as possible, and then see what happens. We're already getting to the point where the set aside districts. I think there's a big case coming up in the Supreme Court about should we have a minority district, a minority black district, or these Latino districts? Why do we need those? This is America. We are one
Mhm.
America. Why are we dividing the people up into these little pots?
Yeah.
Yeah. I go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I agree. And I would just say, if I may, maybe I'm being too idealistic, but don't you think? I understand Maryland's a partisan state and we have other pretty partisan states. But the very fact that the legislature is going through this exercise to try to squeeze out one Republican, uh, do you think there's a possibility of a backlash, or am I just being too idealistic? I just think it's so cynical what they're doing that I would think even a lot of Democrats would have to say this is a little ridiculous. But
I think we're starting to see the backlash already. I think Democrats have lost trust, and that's different than sort of losing the policy decisions or choices. They've lost trust, I think, based on these types of actions,
yeah,
where they try to say we're saving democracy, yet they nominate someone to the presidency without a primary. They claim that they're going to combat gerrymandering by doing more gerrymandering. Like, to me, they've just lost the messaging battle entirely because they don't stand for anything. I think this was the logical conclusion of identity politics. So I think we're seeing the backlash already. And I think if they push forward with this and things continue as they're going, which is there is progress on the horizon. I see the economy turning around. I see peace breaking out. I see opportunity on the horizon, that whenever those things hit, whenever some of these positive outcomes start to come into play, and you still have lost trust. The Democrats are not providing an alternative form of governance. They're just only attacking Trump and everything he stands for. I think you're going to see potentially a red wave at the midterm, which would be unusual to have the party in power getting the benefit of a midterm election rather than what you traditionally see, which is the party in power gets hit pretty hard in the midterm election. So I think we're seeing it, and I think we might see more of it depending on how this plays out.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're onto something there too, because I think the Democrats think that they can use this whole gerrymandering and this redistricting thing in Texas to their advantage and say we're going to go and fight back and do this. Of course, other states like Indiana and saying like, well, look, we'll go there and we can do that and we can squeeze out the Democrats. And this, to me, that's just that race to the bottom. We don't need to do that. I am perfectly fine with once every 10 years. Let's just count everybody up, and do things. I don't have a problem with President Trump saying, we should only count the people who are legally here, right?
Yes.
If they can get that cleared, then I think that's good, because that is kind of a point of contention, I think, with a lot of people, is that, this is based on total population, whether or not you're here legally or not. And so you get these inflated numbers, and you get people who will vote Democrat that are not American citizens. I mean, why can't we have just the citizens vote? Where are all these other people voting? There's a lot of mess going on here. But the Democrats they made a farce out of this thing, particularly in California, because they have an independent redistricting commission that they asked the voters to approve. Now what they're going to do is they're going to ask the voters to suspend that commission so they can squeeze like 4 more seats out of California. Well, I mean, how hypocritical can you get? You've got Eric Holder having this organization about fair redistricting. This is all just a farce. It's a lie. It's a left-wing lie on their part, and I don't think it's going to work. I think, as you said, I'm not sure we're going to see quite a red wave, but my initial concerns over Congress, Republicans maybe losing control, in 2026 because it's a midterm. I'm feeling a little bit better, because even if you attack Trump on tariffs or the deportation, things like that, the National Guard rollout or whatever that he wants to send to other cities and whatnot, the fact of the matter is that the Democrats are still in disarray. What do they stand for? You kind of alluded to it, is that I hate Trump. We hate Trump. That's basically their only message. There's nothing. I don't see them doing anything else.
They haven't provided an alternative. They don't stand for anything, and they're not fighting for anything. They're just trying to tear down or tear apart everything that they don't like. And it's a shame. They're on the wrong side of law enforcement. They're on the wrong side of the rule of law. They're on the wrong side of immigration. They're on the wrong side of border security. They're on the wrong side of foreign policy. And they've backed themselves into this corner where, even though what's best for the country, what's best for the citizens of this country, they find themselves at odds with those positions because they have to come out in opposition to Trump. And then when you start to look at what they've done in education with the boys and girls sports, and how they've conflated this whole issue of gender and how they're trying to infiltrate schools with indoctrination versus education. I mean, these are indefensible positions. I mean, I celebrated the Mahmoud decision because it was the first real pushback of how school boards have completely lost sight of what they're organized to do, which is to set the conditions for students to learn, not to indoctrinate them on some political ideology or some nonsensical approach to inclusivity. If you want to be inclusive, enhance their critical thinking skills so that they can embrace complex ideas. Don't shield them from reality and then provide this false alternative in the name of inclusivity. And I think the Democrats are just on the wrong side of a lot of issues, and they've backed themselves into this corner.
Yeah. A good example of hypocrisy on this threat to democracy stuff. And I'll be quick, but this is a story a lot of people haven't really been following on, but I wrote a column about it. In Michigan, a lady got elected to Congress. She gave up her state Senate seat, and that was back in January. Do you know that state Senate seat is still vacant because the governor is not calling us has spent the whole year not calling a special election because the Senate in Michigan is 19 to 18. It's a competitive seat. If Republicans win that, they tie the state Senate. She needs to get her agenda through. Well, Friday, she finally gave in and relented and scheduled a special election. You know when it is? In May of 2026. And it's just a story that I don't know, that isn't getting much play. And I wrote a column about that it just shows this whole notion of a threat to democracy. Nobody's talking about that. They're talking about Governor Abbott and what he might be doing with redistricting, but Governor Whitmer up here leaving a state Senate seat open, vacant, where they don't have representation, those folks in the 35th legislative district. But anyway, I know I digress from Maryland, but just as an example of sort of the hypocrisy that the Democrats are engaged in. So,
well, Dave, that's still a good point though, because I mean, this, Whitmer, this is out of character for her in the sense of in previous years she has called for quicker elections. I mean, I don't even know if there's a case across the country where a governor has not scheduled a special election for a vacant seat within a few months at the very least. The fact that she's going to be going, how is it, 15 months or something like that, 16 months, and then after that's so I should say May, there's an election in November. I mean, you got to be kidding me, right? I mean, this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever on this.
It must be a quirk in Michigan's constitution or the law that they'd give such broad power to a governor. I would think most constitutions and laws says that you've got 30 days or something to have the election, or 45 days. There's no excuse for anything really less than that, because you would just tell the parties, you nominate, okay, tell us who the nominee is, we print the ballots, and then pick a date. That shouldn't take you longer than 30 days, I would think, or 40 days.
I think what's happened is that when a lot of our founding documents and a lot of the things that have occurred, they didn't expect career politicians to leverage sort of biased approaches to this process. They expected leaders to step into the role and lead, which meant they were bound by their obligation to the people. And so things that went unwritten or unspoken were implied, because they were an extension of leadership. You're going to lead. You're going to do things that are in the best interest of the people of that state or this country. And we now find ourselves grappling with vague language or absent language like, they must not have thought of this. Now, I guarantee you these folks thought of this and just never expected to have to write down that, hey, when you're in a leadership position, you might have to do things that are contrary to your self-interest, but are in the best interest of the people that you work for.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I mean, I want to step back to you were talking about all this stuff with the kind of the whole girls sports, boys sports, so this kind of a thing like this. This is President Trump has made a very big deal about this, and where it kind of languished for a number of years as it was starting to bubble up, with the whole Leah Thomas thing. We're seeing a tremendous change in what's happening there. The NCAA has had to adjust their policy now. We're seeing more people speak up about this. I mean, there'd been an outrage, but it was never able to really take root in this, because the Democrats, the liberal press, they would just not, they would ignore it. They were just like, no, you have to have equality across all things. But, you're a parent, you've got boys and girls in your family. It's like, this is probably the last thing you want to do is see this happen, for your kids. If they play sports, you don't want the opposite sex, people who identify, as a girl in the boys' locker room and vice versa. You don't want that to happen. That's not the way it's supposed to be. I'm glad that we're seeing some change in this. What do you see? I mean, President Trump has been, kind of dismantling the education department. I mean, what do you see, potentially as a future member of Congress in terms of what else needs to be done at the Department of Education? Is this going to be something that, you hope to see go away, or just operate as something very small, and help out, but just not really interfere with what the states are doing, but something else?
Well, going back to my original statement of accountability, transparency, and integrity, if there is a role for a Department of Education, it should be to facilitate coordination and to facilitate funding in some de minimis way. I do not think we should have a robust Department of Education that is sitting as a bureaucratic monolith of getting in the way and absorbing resources. If we are going to have one, then it should only exist to look for ways to provide some assistance to states where it's needed, to ensure that there are some level of continuity and consistency across all of state-run programs, but I do not see a large role for the Department of Education. When you look at when it was created to where we are today, there has been a precipitous decline in performance and then an exponential growth in the cost of education. And if that is in any way, shape, or form related to the Department of Education, then it has been an absolute failure. I'm sure there are other variables, and that's an oversimplification, but I do not see a large role for a Department of Education going forward. I think it is within the purview of states, and that I do think that if we get back to focusing on education and focusing on parents having a voice and parents having a say in the curriculum and the progression of their children, we don't need a Department of Education.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think I mean, you mentioned the Mahmoud decision and all these things. We're seeing, just kind of a sea change in the way we're looking at education. I mean, we're coming out of a period where COVID was a destructive force for our nation's, children and the education process, and that, it's taking, I think there's still, evidence that a lot of the learning recovery still has not happened yet. And
Yes.
they were set back and, from thanks to all these liberal policies, and they're still not quite to where they should be at this point in time. What do we need to do? I mean, to get there. I mean, I think you're kind of been talking about this a little bit, but how do we do this? I mean, this country, we love this country. You have served this country well. How do we make this country great again in the sense of education, make education great again, get our superiority back so that we're really training and bringing up the bright minds, where we've now fallen behind?
I don't think it's a complicated problem. I think we've lost sight of education. I think we've lost sight of the most important thing that we do, which is you are moving a child through a process of continued challenges. And that if you focus on education and you focus on this iterative approach to learning and more complex ideas, you will succeed. But whenever we lost sight of holding kids accountable to learning and having measurable standards, and then also saying that not everyone's going to get an A, we have to say, look, we're going to set the conditions for children to succeed. Not everybody is going to be a straight A student. Not everybody is going to go to college. I think we have to look at what we're teaching and why we're teaching it. I think the fact that we've lost sight of the value of vocational schools in high school and secondary education is a travesty. If you start to think about, schools used to be about creating a pathway for children to learn, focused on fundamentals, things that they were going to use in terms of critical thinking across a broad set of careers or career choices. And we've now reached this point where we seem to be focused on inclusivity and self-esteem and all of these other things that don't foster critical thinking. I think we have to get back to teaching the classics, focusing on math and science, and then ultimately providing vocational choices either in high school or through community colleges and state schools, so that if you have a child that is moving through the schools and shows a propensity for excellence, then AP courses should be offered. If somebody is struggling, then they should have an opportunity for some level of assistance or to look at a pathway that's going to suit their learning style or needs. And then most importantly, we create a pathway for kids to feel good about a vocational path that's going to reward them with an incredible skill set that's going to give them a pathway to middle income and give them an opportunity to engage in the entrepreneurial spirit that we've lost. I'm amazed when I talk to young people and they just don't even think about owning a business anymore or starting a farm. In their mind, it's just too much work, or doesn't have the reward of income and lifestyle. At the end of the day, we want to encourage kids to challenge themselves, create pathways where they can find fulfillment and purpose, and most importantly, to reclaim that entrepreneurial spirit that has defined the American way for hundreds of years.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. I mean, let me ask you this then. I mean, do you think that, what we part of this losing our way is that we've kind of made the kids a little bit lazy?
Yes, 100%. And I say that as a father of four and a Marine Corps officer. But I mean, the idea of learning is that you put children in settings that is going to challenge them. And that's the beauty of learning. You have to allow them to fail so that they see their limits. And then you encourage them to move past that point of failure with confidence. And the way you do that is you teach competency, which creates confidence. And we've seemed to have lost sight of that anything that makes a child uncomfortable, we've eliminated. We've said, no, just try your best and you'll get an A. And if you believe in yourself, you can do anything. I think we have to get back to challenging children in a way that allows them to experience a setback, that allows them to experience working very hard and falling short, and then saying, okay, how do we now make a plan for you to close that gap between where you are and where you'd like to be, whether it's in academics, it's in athletics, or in some other pursuit. So I think we've lost sight of the fact that learning is often done in places where we're uncomfortable. And if we can allow children to learn and be uncomfortable, then that's the best thing we can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, yeah, I think you're right. I think you got to challenge people, and you got to challenge the kids and the young people. And it's like, what was George Bush's line, the soft bigotry of low expectations. I think for a lot of people, we have low expectations, and that hurts them. And I think this generation coming up, all generations really do need to be challenged. And it's sort of our job to do that. And, not just keep making excuses. And it seems this is also another attack on the Democrats. It just seems that they always have an excuse for everything. It's like no responsibility, but lots of excuses.
Right. I think we're moving through the era of victimhood.
Yeah.
I think we went through and we revisited and maybe we corrected some wrongs, but we got to a point where if you could claim a victim status, that somehow was an alternative to accountability. That was an alternative to growth. You could say, well, I can't do anymore because I'm claiming this exception. Now, I'm not saying that to diminish anyone's experience or to say that it wasn't a valid concern. But what I am saying is we have to start holding ourselves accountable. We have to start telling children, yes, you can do anything that you believe in, but you have to be willing to work for it. And we have to show them the value of hard work, that the more time you put in and the more effort you put in, the greater the reward. But if you put in no effort and you still get the reward, we're sending the wrong message. And that gets back to how we make education great again, is by simply focusing on the basics, creating a pathway for excellence, not just academically, but for some students, it's going to be in athletics. Some students, it's going to be in vocational interest. In others, it might be in an academic excellence. But you have to set the conditions for children to grow and be uncomfortable in a way that's going to allow them to develop.
I agree.
All right, we're rounding up near the end here. Just a quick question to you about the kind of the law and order and the crime thing. We've seen, the District of Columbia with the National Guard. Trump can do that because it is the District of Columbia and the feds have the control over that. And he's talked about sending, helping out. I'll say helping out, other cities in like Chicago. I mean, he's talked about, I think, even Maryland and, Governor Moore has been, bucking, back and pushing back on all of that. I don't know about the constitutionality of all of that going outside of the district, but it isn't part of the problem. Is that they don't have enough police. This is, that's why they have this crime problem. They went through all that defund the police nonsense.
Exactly.
And therefore they wind up in these situations. I mean, Muriel Bowser is saying like carjackings are down 87% in DC, for heaven's sakes.
Now, I'm glad you brought that up because I haven't heard that as much as I think it should be said. These are the same folks that 4 years ago were saying police are criminals in uniform and that we need to defund them. And now in classic Democrat fashion saying, you need to give us more money because we need more police. We need more vehicles. We need all the things that we didn't want 4 years ago. So I think they have no credibility whatsoever right now. I'm not a big fan of sending federal troops out, but I will say what Trump is doing is exactly what is needed if you have leaders that are unable or unwilling to provide for the safety of their citizens. In this political game that we're playing right now it's a dangerous one because we're playing with people's lives. And I think Trump is doing the right thing. And to answer your question about federal troops, when federal troops they'd have to be invited, or there would have to be some kind of a threshold of unable or unwilling to enforce the laws. And I think Trump is aware of that. I think President Trump has said, look, you have to ask for our assistance or we'd have to see some exigent circumstance. We saw an exigent circumstance in California, so he nationalized the National Guard. In Chicago, you don't have that same circumstance. So he's come out and said they'll have to ask for our help. And if they ask for it, we'll give it to them. The reason why I don't like federal troops on the ground is, unfortunately, they're not always trained for some of the nuance that's needed in terms of law enforcement. So whenever they're involved, it's usually to set a broad perimeter to allow the limited number of police officers to do the police work. And then you have a perimeter or sort of a containment where you have additional troops available to serve as witnesses or to provide containment, but you still have law enforcement effectuating arrests and detention and investigations. So, and to finish that point, we can't support law enforcement enough. Those guys go out and do what I believe is one of the hardest jobs in the world. As a Marine deployed, you knew which direction to face and you knew who the enemy was and you knew what to do when you encountered them. The fact that you have police that go out every single day and go into unknown situations and they're being asked to de-escalate and assess the criminal behavior of what's going on is a very difficult task. So we can't give them enough support. And if using the National Guard in a limited capacity will allow them to do their jobs better, I fully support that.
All right, we are out of time. Thanks for joining us tonight. Before you go, please let us know how people can find you, get more information on your campaign.
Great. BURNETTForCongress.com is the website. From there, you can sign up for our newsletter or volunteer. We'll also have postings there. We've got several events coming up in Frederick and Washington counties over the next month. We've got a few events coming up here in northern or upper Montgomery. So go to the website, sign up for the newsletter, sign up to volunteer, and then look for us either doing some door knocking or getting out and running a 5K or hitting a parade.
All right, that's great. Thanks for joining us tonight, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Let's go down to Missoni, where Italian cuisine shines. Let's go down to Missoni's, we'll have a good old time. Homemade